This week, we have Nigel Williams here to bring us all sorts of info about Multipath TCP, what it is, how it works, and the ongoing effort to bring it into FreeBSD. All that, and of course, the latest BSD news is coming your way right now. BSD Now, episode 106, Multipath TCP, recorded September 9th, 2015. Hey, I'm your host, Chris Moore.
And I'm Alan Jude.
And we're glad to have you guys with us this week, right on the verge of heading out to VBSD Con. I guess we're both leaving tomorrow. Alan will be flying, and I'll be driving up. So I guess you'll have a much shorter trip than me.
Yep.
Mine's about 7.5 hours, but it's a beautiful drive going through Virginia. So
I think my trip's under 2 hours.
Yeah. Well, unless you have my luck with airlines, and
I'm pretty good with airlines so far.
Yeah, no, I'm glad I'm driving in this case, but I am bringing the whole family up, so this is going to be fun. We're going to go and enjoy the conference. I don't think, have you met my wife?
No,
yet?
I've not. Actually, I was just going to say I've not got to meet any of your family.
Meet the wife.
I've
and
met both
the
your
whole
brothers,
crew.
but not the rest of your actual family.
There you go. Well, okay, I'm bringing them all up, and we're going to all enjoy the conference, and the kids are looking forward to a few days off from school and just enjoying the time hanging out with mom and dad. So it's going to be good. And of course, I don't know, are tickets closed now? Can you not get into VBSD?
I think you still can. You don't get the early bird rate, but you can still get in.
Well, so if you're catching this and you're really late, or you've been under a rock for the last couple months, yes, VBSD Con's happening this weekend. So try to come out, still make that happen, and we'll look forward to seeing you in Reston, Virginia.
Yes, and everybody that is already coming, make sure you say hi to us when you're there.
Yes. I don't know, do we have anything we have to sign, or how about T-shirts? I haven't gotten my T-shirt
Yeah,
yet.
the T-shirts, mine is in Illinois doing the border paperwork. I checked it a couple hours ago.
I might have to look. I did get something saying it was going to ship soon, but I hadn't checked back to see if there was a tracking. Maybe it'll come today. There's still a chance.
Yeah. But yes, I'm assuming I'll have mine for Europe, so I'll be able to show that off.
Well, yeah, I should definitely have mine for Ohio Linux Fest as well. So I'm going to definitely wear that to Ohio Linux, and we can get pictures if you want to see what it looks like and stuff. It'd be awesome. Okay, but we should get to the news. We've got quite a bit this week. So first up, we have a cool blog post here from Peter Wim, who, of course, works in the FreeBSD build cluster there. And he brings us kind of a behind-the-scenes look at how they had to spend time debugging an issue which cropped up on the cluster recently.
Right, and this is a bit more of a rant about the typical way you deal with one of these problems. Part of it stems from some anger he has with the way people do things where he works. But, bottom line, and kind of the title of it here is, don't just back things out. Like, backing out changes isn't necessarily the right thing. And as he talks about in the article, it ended up being that it had nothing to do with the bug. It just the commit exposed the bug. Exactly.
But it was still there. Yeah,
so there's a process called bisecting. Basically, it's like, well, I know it worked on Monday, and now it's Thursday, and it doesn't work. So here's everything that's changed since Monday. I'm going to cut that in half. Also, I'll back out half the things, and then does it still work? Yes. Then I know it's got to be in the second half. And if it doesn't work in the midpoint, then it's in the first half. And you can keep doing that until you find which commit is causing the problem. But just backing out that commit at the end doesn't necessarily tell you that was the problem. And in this case, a recent commit that updated the JE malloc code in FreeBSD kind of looked like the culprit, but when they actually chased it down and looked further into it, turns out it was a kernel bug that's been lurking there since 1997.
Wow. So he pretty much proves his point here, why these things need to be debugged properly.
It's like we'd have to back out everything.
Yes, but he mentions that this is a bug since 97, and it had been showing up sporadically for years. Like, they had seen just odd reports here and there of time failing or whatever. And maybe it's a network hiccup. That's what caused NTPD to stop working or whatever. And people have written it off. But no. It turns out it was this other bug, which had been lurking for well over a decade. So going on 2 at this point. So.
So it's quite a good right up, and I'm looking forward to seeing more stuff as Peter kicks off this blog he started. But it also kind of reminds me of the IPv6 bug that Netflix found. Basically, it had been around for a while, but at a regular amount of traffic, most people wouldn't run into it was like counter overflow or something. Most people wouldn't have sent enough packets to cause it to overflow until the machine had been running for like 9 months. And most people would reboot for updates before that. Or if it did crash after 9 months, it wouldn't do it often enough for them to be like, oh, something's wrong. But Netflix was doing enough traffic out of one machine over IPv6, because Comcast and so on do a lot of V6 for Netflix now, that they would hit it once a day.
Ooh,
and so they were they recreated it often enough to be able to see the pattern and track it down and find out what the problem was, whereas everybody else hadn't. And it kind of reminds me of that. This one, this one's been lurking there since 97, but only some other change actually exposed what the problem was. And, the right reaction to that is not, back out all these new JE-malloc changes. It was fix the actual bug.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
And that's why, the new culture of just bisecting and making the problem go away isn't necessarily the right approach. You got to look for the root cause and actually make it happen.
Well, so he kind of sums it all up with 4 points here on his lessons learned, which I'll read for you here. So first of all, he says, backing out is a diagnostic tool, not a solution. Backing out could not have exposed this particular bug. And don't give up when you have the luxury of time. You will likely learn something in the process of figuring out why. And fourth, and probably most important, computers are hard, after all.
Yes. Well, it was interesting to watch this happen in the chat room. Peter and Kib going through it literally all day, going back and forth, trying to figure out what was happening. And it's like, this is all slightly over my head, dealing with, kernel memory allocation stuff and locking pages and so on. But, it was really very educational to watch these two experts going at it and figuring out where the problem actually was. And, you can see different hypotheses come up, and then, they chase it down a little bit, and it's like, nope, it's not that, go back. And yeah, it was very educational.
Very cool. Well, thank you so much for spending the time writing this up, Peter. We're glad we got to talk about it, and congrats on finding a bug and fixing it from that long ago.
Yes.
That's not every day you run into one of those.
Exactly.
So. Okay, well, next up, I know we've talked about the BSD router project in the past. Not recently. It's probably been a little while now. But we have something interesting here where there's a new project branch of FreeBSD current that's been created, where they're creating a bunch of optimizations to the routing code in particular. And we have some benchmarks here talking about that as well, with links to that if you'd like to see some pretty graphs.
So Olivia has done a benchmark that compares FreeBSD 10.2, FreeBSD 11 head, versus the project branch with this extra code in it. And you can see here that as it scales up with the number of queues on the NIC, that all of a sudden, as you add more queues, the performance is going up quite linear. When you go from 1 queue to 2, performance goes up by 88%, which is, almost the 100% you'd expect from double the number of queues. Or even with going to the 4 queues, you're getting to 270%, and you can see it scales up. But importantly, when the number of queues hits the number of CPUs, traditionally FreeBSD's performance has actually gone back down at that point because of the contention. But with this new patch, it actually stays up there pretty close to what it was at peak. So you're not losing the performance when you run into the contention, because most of the contention has been removed. So all of a sudden, on top of being able to double the networking performance or the forwarding performance, it's actually maintaining it rather than falling back down once the system gets overloaded.
Oh, that's great. So I guess since this is a branch of current, hopefully these changes will land at some point in mainline as well, so everyone benefits. But yeah, that's awesome. And do they have I don't know if you read anywhere, do they have a cut of the BSD router project somewhere that has these changes into it now where people can try it? Or
I don't think so. Or possibly somewhere. But if you check out the GitHub branch, they have a couple of other benchmarks that they've run. But also they have the tools to be able to run it yourself. So if you want to try some different things, or if you have some different hardware, they have basically two test systems, a quad-core L5630, which is 2.1 gigahertz, with a pair of 10 gigabit Intel NICs, and then they have a newer 8-core E5-2650, which is 2.6 gigahertz, with a pair of 10 gigabit Chelseo NICs. And they've run a couple of different tests on each, but it'd be interesting to run their 10 gigabit Intel tests, because I have that pair of those same Intel 10 gigabit NICs, but mine are copper, not fiber. But running those same tests on my machines that have beefier CPUs and see what kind of a difference that makes. How much of it is the card and how much of it is CPU. That's the limit in the performance and so on.
So I'm looking at his repo here. Does his tool also just spit out the nice graphs as well? It looks like...
It looks quite nice. So I'm definitely going to check this out.
Yeah, I have to play with that.
If you're using actual the BSD router project stuff, it can actually handle like automating, applying different configurations and running all the tests, so you don't have to supervise it even. I'll probably run it on vanilla FreeBSD, but so I'll have to do a little bit of the work myself. But the script still seems like it'll do a good job collecting results and making the pretty graphs, because that's what everybody wants.
Yeah, it gets you close enough that the last step's not very far.
And importantly, it also runs Ministat and so on, and does all the actual science on the math to tell you, not just the average, but what the statistically significant change in the performance is between your comparison points.
Nice. Okay. Well, next up we have our buddy Ted Uangst, who's always posting cool and interesting things. I got sent this one earlier this week, but this one in particular is kind of odd because it's a little bit of a kerfuffle going on between the S-Tunnel folks and LibreSSL. So Ted writes up a little bit of this weird licensing situation which has come up recently.
Well, the first thing is I wasn't actually aware that GPL licensed software had to have an exception to the GPL to allow you to use OpenSSL.
Right. And then it doesn't help that he's releasing this under the OpenSSL license. It's not even under GPL, right? So that's the S-Tunnel license.
Well, S-Tunnel is GPL with an OpenSSL exception.
Yes. But it's really confusing. But I guess the long and short of it here is the author has created some specific named exceptions for S-Tunnel, where certain SSL libs that are part of the base operating system are allowed to be valid linking targets. But the author of S-Tunnel does not consider LibreSSL as OpenSSL, therefore not a valid linking target.
So so the GPL includes an exception for stuff that's included in the operating system. And then the S-Tunnel license itself includes an explicit exception for OpenSSL, but that doesn't apply to LibreSSL, and it's causing a bit of trouble. And I can see where it's kind of in the place of, well, how do we actually solve this? Because LibreSSL is still under the OpenSSL license, right? Because they can't just relicense it, and so. But at the same time, S-Tunnel can't go and change their license probably very easily either.
No, not at all. But I think I would agree with the OpenBSD guys, and the kind of the take they have taken on this is that they would still consider LibreSSL to be OpenSSL, albeit a much smaller set of OpenSSL with a lot of stuff cut out, but still technically running OpenSSL. And I guess that's how I would read this too.
The biggest problem might actually be that I think the OpenSSL license specifically says if you modify OpenSSL, you can't call it OpenSSL. And then the license for S-Tunnel specifically says you have to be using what is called OpenSSL.
Yeah, but we'll just say it's just patched.
Right. Well, in particular, this whole thing is just an explanation of why people shouldn't create specific named exceptions like that, but should create one that's a little more open, because there, really is what is OpenSSL. Boring SSL is also a thing, and it's even closer to OpenSSL than Libre is. And then it gets further confused by the fact that, OpenBSD ships with LibreSSL, so it's in the base operating system and you're fine. But if you want to use LibreSSL on FreeBSD, where it's not in the base system, then you can't use S-Tunnel.
Well, how do you define base system? So on PCBSD, we have SSL or LibreSSL as part of our PCBSD base system package. Like, we would consider that part of the base because so many of our tools and stuff, which are the base system, things like X and whatnot that are different from, say, FreeBSD. mean, that would be considered base system to me. So, I mean, it just gets really kind of in the weeds, and how much time is going to be wasted discussing these kind of things. I don't
Yes.
know.
Well, because the bigger point he raises is that specifically the whole point of the GPL license is to ensure you always has freedom to fork the code.
Mm-hmm.
But by adding this exception to the GPL for OpenSSL, so that you can only use this GPL code with OpenSSL, that means that you then are stopping people from being able to fork OpenSSL, because then it's not OpenSSL and now it doesn't meet the license. So it's actually the GPL containing a clause technically saying no forking of OpenSSL allowed.
Yeah.
And it's just like, oh my. It's like, that's not intentional.
And just another case study on why licenses should be simple and more free. And
this
just,
is why 2 sentences is the maximum.
All right. The more sentences, the more complexity, the more you're going to run into cases like this, where it's like, oh, we thought we were complying, but we're not. And that. So anyway, but interesting write-up if you're curious on reading some of the details. And in the blog post, Ted links to some of the, I guess, mailing list posts, it looks like here by the, or actually there's a Twitter and a mailing list post by the author of SSL discussing it and why he doesn't consider LibreSSL to equal OpenSSL.
Although interesting, I saw a later tweet from him where he was talking about doing using PF rules to transparent proxy into S-tunnel. And I think he put out the challenge that writing one set of rules that will work on FreeBSD, OS 10, and OpenBSD's PFs. And if somebody would do it, then Bernard was trying to set up a trade. It's like, all right, I'll do that for you if you will accept LibreSSL.
Oh, man.
So it'll be interesting to see what happens there. But
yeah, we'll see.
I think this is definitely that nobody intended for any of this fracas to happen when they wrote the license originally.
That's right. So things like that can come back to bite you. So when you're licensing your next project or whatever, keep this in the back of your mind. You don't want to be dealing with this kind of crud a year or two later. So.
BSD or ISC, it's easy.
Yes. Okay, well, next up in the news here, I know we've talked about systemd's shim in OpenBSD, or SystemBSD, which was a Google Summer of Code project. But now we have a link here to some of the slides where Ian Sutton is talking about this project, kind of where it's at, and how the Google Summer of Code project has gone on. But,
so these are fresh slides from just this week.
Yep, that's right. So there's a lot of good new info here, but it looks like it kind of as a refresher, what's happening here is he's basically taken something like dbus, for example, and is using that to create daemons which emulate the various systemd components, such as hostnamed, locality, timedated, etc., and all the other friends related to that. But it looks like written in Scratch, from scratch in C. Where they're going with this is he says he hopes it becoming a port, which will then, of course, allow GNOME and other related tools, which depend on a lot of systemd mechanisms, to now function properly on OpenBSD. I don't know. Now, was this did he give this talk somewhere? Because these are the slides. Are there videos or audio anywhere?
I don't know if there's a video anywhere or not. Yeah,
I would be actually curious to hear or listen to the video and kind of see where this is at now. But this may be a good read even without the audio or video yet, because the slides do have a lot of good information in there, especially if maybe you're a current or aspiring porter on any of the other BSDs who want to bring over maybe the new GNOME or any newer applications which just depend upon systemd. Maybe this is something we can start sharing among all the other BSDs as well, so we're not each having to do the exact same thing. Especially since I assume if he used dbus, I imagine that's available on all the BSDs now as well.
I love this little note here. It's like, dbus is terrible. Dbus is ported to BSD. We will use dbus.
That's right. Well, it's just kind of, that's the realistic approach, right? Yep. This is what we have to work with. We may not like it, but it's there. And otherwise, imagine rewriting something like that from scratch. I mean, that would be multiple GSOC projects in and of itself, I'm sure. But it'll be interesting to see how this takes off. And like I said, hopefully this becomes a portable thing, kind of, a la OpenSSH or a la LibreSSL or whatever, and we start seeing it show up in other non-Linuxes as well. Because I can see how this would definitely be helpful down the road as more and more of these systemd isms start creeping into open source software. Okay, so before we go to
the other thing you noted here is apparently sometimes some of the systemd daemons actually implement a lot more things than they document.
That's right.
So when he was going through the documentation, re-implementing out all the features that it was requiring, it turns out there was much more stuff it did, but just was never documented anywhere.
Well, and he mentions, just some of these things like the APIs of this just way too long to even discuss. There's just so much junk in this one daemon, and he gives some of his reasons on why he switched from Linux as well. Some of his personal histories at the beginning there you might find interesting as well, talking about the Gordian knot of just code, just blah, mess, spaghetti. Yep. But it's still fascinating to read. Again, if anybody out there was at the place where he gave this talk, or if knows of a recording or video, send that in to us at feedback at bsdnow.tv, because I, for one, personally kind of want to see it, and I'm sure others would as well. And, of course, we will bring that to you if we can dig that up. Okay, so before we get to our first interview this week with Nigel Williams, where we're going to be talking about some awesome multipath TCP stuff, we first, of course, want to mention our first sponsor this week, which is going to be IX Systems. And, of course, you should know the URL by now. But if you don't, ixsystems.com/BSD Now, where you can go there and get in touch with these guys and let them help you design whatever the next product is you need for the server rack or for storage. Heck, I mean, even if you want to get a little FreeNAS Mini for your home, something you can put under your desk or in the closet, they can handle that as well. And everything in between, up to crazy systems like the 80-core behemoth they built a while back, and the one with 40 NICs as well.
It was 24 10-gig NICs.
Or 24 10-gig NICs.
Ridiculous.
Yeah, I mean, just crazy projects that our places would probably be like, no, we don't do that. Like, we don't have those on the shelf.
Yeah, the machine with the 24 10-gigabit NICs actually came up in discussion at the pub at BSD Cam in Cambridge. So we're all sitting around the pub and we were talking. I forget how it came up. It's Intel started building their own switches or something. It was like,
sure.
Or it's like, these switches are just so expensive and silly. I just feel like putting a bunch of NICs in a computer and making it a switch. And it's like, wow, I happen to remember that. Oh yeah, here it is on the IX blog. Here's this Megaport machine, and it's got like 256 gigs of RAM, and
because like, why not?
Yeah, and it's like huge amount of CPU power, because in this case, I don't think they're actually using it as a switch. They were just pushing huge amounts of traffic out of it.
Did they happen to say what that was for? Like what the intended use case was?
I don't think so, but I think it might have been virtual machines that were doing a lot of networking.
Okay.
Somewhere where you would actually be able to saturate. Because in that system, it was actually 4 separate systems in a 2U chassis, each one having 6 of those 10-gig NICs. And I guess they were just pushing a lot of traffic.
Nice. Well, the thing is, you may have, maybe where you're working, there's some big project like that, and you're thinking, wow, nobody does a custom build like this. Well, guess what? IX may be able to do that for you. You just need to tell them what you're trying to do.
Exactly.
And because their sales guys are actual engineers and know their way around this left and right, they can help you design the perfect solution to whatever that problem is you're trying to solve. But imagine if they're as good as they are doing these weird custom things, I imagine if you just need a straight server with some storage and some CPU to spare, I imagine they can hook you up pretty easily with one of those as well. So definitely go to these guys first, because they know they're open source and they know their stuff.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is that they likely know better than you do what you actually need. So when you talk to them, tell them what problem you have and what you're trying to solve, and it will go from there.
Great. So, of course, we like hearing from happy customers, IX as well. So if you've got a new server or some fancy new rack, take a picture and send it in. We like to see that. It's always good to see the hardware out in the wild, and let us know how it's working for you. Okay, well, we're joined now by Nigel Williams, who's here to talk to us about Multipath TCP and all sorts of goodness there. But first of all, thank you so much for being on the show today. We appreciate it.
No problem.
Before we get into the Multipath stuff, first tell us about your personal background. How did you first get involved in BSD?
Okay, so I did an engineering degree. Okay. So I finished that in 2006-ish.
Sure.
And so after finishing that, I went on to work at the university I was studying at Swinburne in a network research center there. And so my boss there, Grenville, was basically a FreeBSD guy. And so one of the things of working in the lab was that you came in and you were told to install FreeBSD.
Right. And indoctrinated you early, right?
Essentially, yeah. So basically that was my pathway to FreeBSD. I didn't know an awful lot about it before then, but
Sure.
I sure knew about it once we started.
What version of it was it back then?
Oh geez, it was like, it would have been 4 or 5, I think.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So it's been a while.
Yeah. So there was all that, and then building KD and all that good
Yes.
stuff that I
Compiling from forts.
that I had to do, that I'd never had to do before. So yeah,
Okay.
that was the introduction there, basically. And then you use that for network experiments and things like that. So a lot of WNet kind of related stuff, that kind of thing. Yeah, pretty much that was it.
How did you get on to actually doing development?
So that was, I kind of went off and did other things for a couple of years, so I wasn't doing engineering or IT, or research stuff for a while. Then I came back to Swinburne in kind of 2011-ish.
Sure.
And I was doing a little bit of kind of like porting something, some FreeBSD, a patch that we had for doing some statistics gathering on FreeBSD, porting that to, for classification, like traffic classification, porting that to a little embedded device. And I kind of stuck around after that, and the project that came up was Multipath TCP, so this was kind of in mid-2012-ish.
Okay.
And it was basically implement Multipath TCP on FreeBSD. So
Sure.
Learn how to compile a kernel and, not compile, but learn how to start modifying the kernel and brush up on your C, because that's what you're going to be doing.
Yeah.
And that was essentially my pathway into kind of doing development stuff.
Cool.
Right. So you want to tell us what Multipath TCP is?
All right. So Multipath TCP is basically just an extension on top of TCP. So, and the main purpose is that if you've got a multi-homed host, so something with multiple addresses or network cards or whatever, what that allows you to do is then to employ both of those, or however many interfaces that you've got, just use them within one standard TCP connection. So you've got an application that's written to use TCP. If you're running a multipath kernel underneath that and kind of unawares to the application, the kernel will start, bringing up other interfaces, scheduling, and kind of multiplexing your data across whatever interfaces you've got, and kind of doing that transparently. And then at the receiver side, that's not aware of anything that's going on like that.
Really?
So that's the basic thing. Just using your addresses and multiplexing your data across them, and doing it kind of transparently and backwards compatible way.
That's slick.
With TCP. Yeah.
So like if you were using that on a device like a phone, it would be able to use like Wi-Fi and your 4G at the same time, kind of thing.
Yeah. So that's kind of the when I give my talk tomorrow, that'll be the layman's kind of most simple example is if you've got a phone and you may be connected to Wi-Fi, and you don't necessarily have to use both connections. You can say reserve this 3G interface for use, in case my Wi-Fi disappears.
Sure.
Or you could decide to stripe that data straight away. But so a phone is a good example, and I think so in iOS they have a multipath implementation, and they're using that with Siri, and I believe that it's used in that kind of capacity where you can start your connection to whatever Siri server is over Wi-Fi or a cellular, and it'll transfer between. I think that's what it does.
Right.
I'm saying this without
in particular
without any references.
Apple's Multipath TCP is only activated talking to Apple servers. Right?
Yeah. So that's only within Apple stuff. Yeah. And only within Siri-related stuff, I believe.
Okay.
Yeah.
So has any of this work showed up in FreeBSD yet, or is this still ongoing in your own private repos?
My stuff, or
Multipath
in general.
Yeah. So Multipath. Sorry, I should say. There's a Linux implementation that was kind of the reference implementation.
Sure.
There's a couple of I guess closed source commercial implementations, or implementations that haven't been seen. And there's what I've been working on, and I'm doing that as part of a master's degree, I guess. And so the FreeBSD Foundation's providing kind of my funding for that.
Sure.
And basically, yeah, I worked on it for a couple of years, for roughly a year, 11 months, I think. Then I had to do another project for a year, and I was kind of working on it in my spare time.
Sure.
Then I started my master's last year, sort of in the middle of last year, and since then I've sort of gone through and reviewed that code that I had initially written as someone who wasn't very familiar with writing kind of kernel code, and saw, you know, a whole bunch of issues. And so I went back and sort of really redesigned it and re-implemented it from scratch. And so as of, you know, a couple of weeks ago, it finally works again, and it's doing the multipath thing. And so the intention is that within, you know, the next few weeks or so, I'll release another patch. It'll just be a patch against head.
Nice.
And people can download that and start playing with it, and at some point in the near future have a public repository, so people can if they see problems with it, which I'm sure they will, they can contribute something back, or make suggestions, or check the source out. Yeah. So that's a near-term thing. It's just going to be a bunch of patches, hopefully a few of them for the remainder of the year.
Oh,
I look forward to seeing hopefully that landing and occurring at some point.
So can you expand a bit more on what the advantages of Multipath TCP are?
Well, the advantages, aside from I guess, you know, the backup. There's a couple. There's persistence. So there's things like you can kind of do mobility using Multipath TCP. So if you're just connected to the one access point, say, but you're using a multipath connection to do that, you can go out of range of that access point, keep that connection alive for a small period of time, you know, seconds maybe, and then if you come within range of another access point, bring that back up and then resume your connection there, without having to sort of do any teardown and reestablish or anything like that. So kind of yeah. So mobility is one thing. The backup stuff is another thing, and so mobility through switching between interfaces. The other advantages that you get is that you can start to treat all of your TCP, they're called subflows. So what a multipath connection is made up of a bunch of different TCP connections, pretty much. So they look like TCP on the wire.
Sure.
So you can start to use that as a shared resource, and you can control the congestion windows of all those flows, and you can use that for kind of traffic shaping, or for, you know, bottleneck avoidance and things like that. So so you get kind of some benefits in that, in terms of if you have you know, multiple paths and there's a bottleneck on one path, the congestion control can become aware of that and steer your traffic
the other way.
path. Yeah.
So coming from a desktop perspective, would this be something that could potentially like get rid of the lag interface for us, where we could say go out over the Ethernet if possible, but fall back to the Wi-Fi or something?
Yeah, I don't know. I think you can specify which interface you want to use as a primary interface.
Sure.
And specify particular. So this comes down to path management. So it's kind of a module of Multipath TCP is how do you manage all of your interfaces that are available, and using that you can basically say to your multipath connection, which interfaces can I use now, or what should I use them for? So I guess that's maybe
possible.
Yeah.
Oh, I'd be curious to see that.
Yeah.
So yes, how does the security work? So if I make a connection and then I switch interfaces, I'm using a different IP address. How do I continue?
You know, there's some signaling involved. So I didn't mention it, but you do signal to the remote to the remote end. You also have a token. So in the case where you've suddenly got a new address that the other end isn't aware of, you can use that token. You can send us in packet with that token and some multipath specific option as well, and you can use that token to associate that with that previous connection. The token is generated during the connection setup.
So the remote end would have to be aware of the multipath.
The remote end would be it'll only talk between two multipath end hosts.
And so firewalls in the middle might have to learn about it?
So that's like an interesting question, and I haven't really kept up to speed with
Sure.
all the discussions related to that. But yeah, in terms of middle boxes and firewalls and kind of policies in terms of
So if it has a state table and it's expecting reply packets only to come from this one IP, it might drop them.
and that kind of stuff. I haven't really looked too much into.
Sure.
I think there are people kind of in the IETF who kind of have gone through a lot of that and kind of figured out, where things work and where things might be an issue.
How do we make a state table that can track these tokens and be like,
Yeah.
it doesn't matter what the source IP address is, as long as they have the right token, then it's part of this session.
Yeah. Although I guess it's worth saying that from say if you've got some kind of stateful firewall or whatever, it's not. It sees that as a completely independent TCP connection, so a new connection altogether, and it may not be looking at the token that's in that initial SYN packet. So it's
depending on the type of stateful firewall, it might only allow the initiation of a new connection from the inside.
And in that case, it would just fall over, I assume.
Right.
And these are all things. They're kind of like ongoing questions, really,
Sure.
and people are nodding that out. Just not me, really.
Right. So I guess that kind of raises the opposite question, though. If I have a bunch of hosts that are not multipath aware, can I use my firewall to take their not multipath connections and multipath them?
Yeah, I think so. I think there are some. Again, I don't know the details on all of it, but there are some kind of proxies. There's multipath proxies is another thing that I do believe there's RFCs on how to set one of those up. But adding that.
Linking two private networks via firewall together with multipath.
Yeah, with multipath in the middle. And the ends not being aware of any of that. Yeah.
Right, and stuff like the other thing I was picturing is a lot of people have dual WAN routers, right? They have two separate internet connections, and there's all kinds of issues with that because it's we can make sure that when you make a connection to a certain site always goes at one link so that it doesn't switch IP addresses or whatever, but you end up never being able to use both links to the full potential.
Sure.
Yeah.
But if you could use multipath, you could...
And that's something you can do, proxying is one thing that... and I think there's commercial implementations that do the proxying.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's just, with BSD being so good at firewalls...
Someone should run
But if somebody wants really interesting work to do, it's multipath TCP. So is it possible to use multipath? What's the rollout for multipath going to be like if it can only be used if both ends support it?
So what happens is that if a part of the handshake is also determines what the other host is capable of, and if anything kind of goes missing, if any of the options disappear during that handshake, then it just falls back to standard TCP. So you can drop a multipath box in. Get it to talk to other hosts.
Sure.
If it hits another multipath host, then
you get the benefits.
But otherwise it just stays as standard
TCP.
like
TCP++, right?
Yeah.
There you go.
Is there any way to accelerate adoption by making it able to use it without the other end understanding multipath?
No.
Yeah, that's
too bad.
Right.
Multipath seems like it would solve a lot of problems for video streaming.
Right. Yeah, and remote video streaming as well. And again,
that's definitely one. A lot of our scaling, a lot of our customers are live streaming from sports venues and so on.
Yeah.
And they'll have
multiple connections.
Yeah, if they can have 4 3G connections, different SIM cards to get more bandwidth and different phone companies, whatever, and be able to basically bond all that together by just doing multipath.
And even personally, a while ago I used to do some video broadcasts, some web streaming, and we had a relatively slow ADSL connection and a reasonably quick LTE connection as well, but that was kind of flaky with contention and stuff. So so having the opportunity to use either of those automatically would have been great, and I was like, multipath TCP problem, but I was busy implementing and not didn't have something that worked.
Yes, and the other end didn't have it.
Yeah, and the other end, of course, I would have needed to a proxy that time. So
but it could definitely be a solution if your ISP had one of these multipath proxies at
Yeah,
their end
yeah.
Yeah.
could do interesting things.
Yeah, and I thought with even having in as an Amazon instance or something. I don't know if you can patch the kernels on those. I assume not.
I think on the FreeBSD ones you can.
Okay, yeah. So and something like that, and so you've got that host there, to terminate the multipath part.
Yeah, multipath VPN.
Yeah,
Right.
Yeah.
That's kind of cool. Awesome. Or is there anything else you want to tell us about?
No, I couldn't think of anything.
I have one more question, but I forget it now.
Okay. Well, cool. Well, I'm sure it'll come to you right when we're done with the interview.
If you have multiple connections and they're different speeds, does it like split up the connection evenly between them, or how does it deal with?
Yeah. So there's that's the scheduling side of things mostly. So as you can imagine, having these kind of paths which are sort of asymmetric in a way. If you just simply say, I'm going to send this segment on this path, or I'm going to send this next one on this path, you'll quickly run into head of line blocking issues and that kind of stuff. So you don't want to have too many segments going over your slow path and slowing down the reassembly at the other end.
Just round robin's not going to be a good solution.
And at the moment, I'm just the implementation is just round robining, and more than just head of line blocking. There's some other quirkiness. I guess that'll be in the talk. I'll talk about it. But you can schedule, based on a few different things, and either which path has the lowest RTT, or which one's got the biggest kind of congestion window available at the moment. And again, that's something where it's not strictly part of the protocol, but it's like provide the hooks, and then again, I didn't mention. The part of the reason why I'm working on this implementation is so we can do at our lab more experiments, kind of congestion control related and scheduling related and that kind of stuff. And so the scheduling part of stuff is interesting, particularly when you've got these paths which aren't always the same capacity and things like that. And so determining where do I send my next bit of data. From when do I do a retransmit, because when do I terminate the subflow because it's slowing everything else down. And they're all like outstanding questions that need a bit of research into them.
And so if you're receiving a stream, so if you're downloading a file on the internet, like most people do, for the scheduling, you're mostly at the mercy of the sender.
At the mercy of the sender. So the sender basically determines all of that stuff.
Okay. Makes sense.
You just have to buffer everything if it arrives out of order.
Right.
And hope you've got big enough buffers if the scheduler is not playing nicely. Yeah.
Cool.
Because just the other week we were talking with Sefi, and he had apparently there's interesting RFC about avoiding some retransmits when packets don't come in the right order for not multipath TCP.
Right.
That he implemented on Dragonfly. That sounded interesting.
Okay. Well, don't know about that, but I'll have a look at it because multipath needs to replicate a lot of the retransmits and all of that stuff that TCP does as well. So
cool. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show with us this week, Nigel. We appreciate it, and we'll of course when your patches land, we'll have to highlight that on the episode and let people know that.
I've talked to Big Game now, so I actually
right. We're expecting the bars high.
Yeah, it's all on record.
Yes, I'm very much looking forward to using multipath TCP between my servers for ZFS replication, so that if it's hiccups, I'm not going to lose it until Matt hurries up with the resumable send for ZFS. Right.
So if I'm roaming my laptop and VPN between the two, I'm thinking interesting stuff here.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Well, I would be pretty happy if it ever got to that stage where you could do things like that. So.
And I guess that's one of the other questions we don't think to ask. But as a student, basically just doing research, how interesting does it feel to know that when you build this, there are going to be people using it in production to do interesting things?
Yeah. It's a different thing. So I guess with research, it's not always. Sometimes the topic's going to be a little bit esoteric or a bit, kind of in a shoebox somewhere, and you don't get a lot of interest, like wider interest. But in this case, working on something that's relatively new and it could potentially solve problems for various different people and different kinds of problems. It's a different experience to have people emailing me saying, "Hey, when's that thing going to be working?
Right.
That thing you've been doing, where is it?"
Yeah.
So yeah, it's fun. It's kind of it's a good driver in a way because when it's done, there'll be people who will be using it and possibly people who are improving it. So yeah, so that's good. It's good to work on something like that.
Right, and it's a good resume line. Right.
Yeah. I need something good on the resume. There's not that much impressive so far. So. Yeah.
Oh, that's a good one.
Yeah, so that'll be a good one. Yeah.
Yep.
Well, great. Well, again, thank you so much for coming on the show with us, and we appreciate it, and hope you guys enjoyed the interview. So, of course, we got to get to our news roundup, but before we do that, we have a sponsor here we need to mention, which is going to be DigitalOcean right now, which is at digitalocean.com, of course, where you can go and get set up, spin up a droplet pretty much in under 60 seconds, which is just pretty slick. And better yet, if you've made your account or if you're about to, don't forget to use the coupon code FreeBSD Now. That'll give you a $10 credit, which is good for 2 months of one of their lower end VMs, which still gives you a terabyte of traffic a month.
Yeah.
I mean, come on. That's a lot.
I think most people would struggle to use a terabyte of traffic.
Yeah, unless you're doing something really crazy, but even so, they can scale it up. So if you need more, you can, of course, purchase that.
Yep.
But hey, that $10 credit's a great way if you want to go ahead and get started and start playing with it. And if that'll last a couple months, great. You can get everything all spun up perfectly the way you like it, and then kind of upgrade it as you go from there.
Yep.
Of course, FreeBSD can be installed pretty much just right from their site. You just click a couple buttons, and next thing you know, you got something you can SSH into that's ready to go.
Yep.
And of course, OpenBSD can be installed as kind of a sideload thing as well.
Yeah,
so,
because you get an actual HTML5 console to your virtual machine. It means you can fix anything that goes wrong, and you can also make anything you might want to go wrong happen. And then all of a sudden, your FreeBSD machine is now booting OpenBSD.
That's right. So yeah, definitely ways you can do that. And we'll have to see. Maybe somebody will try throwing Ned or Dragonfly in there at some point, and we'll bring you that info if we find that, of course. But anyway, at the meantime, go to digitalocean.com. And if you talk to those guys, of course, mention that you love BSD in general, that you heard it on BSD Now. That way they can hear that their community is really digging their FreeBSD support, which is awesome. Okay, so next up, we got some OpenBSD news. I know we've talked a little bit in the previous weeks about their UEFI bootloader work, which has been going on. But it looks like those patches and that code has now finally landed in the tree. So that's in OpenBSD current and available for you to start playing with now.
Yes.
In addition, it looks like they've patched the fdisk utility. There's a new -B flag, which when used in conjunction with -I is going to create the special EFI system partition on AMD 64 or i386. So make note of that. That'll come in handy if you're doing a fresh install with that. We have a link to the commit if you'd like to find more details on that.
And the instructions.
And it looks like you have... Yeah, it looks like you have some Twitter benchmarks here.
Yeah, so they came up with a fairly interesting benchmark. It was to use time to then measure how long it takes to cat etc term cap. And so, if you're running in an X-term window in X, how fast are the standard WS frame buffer? How fast is it? And so they've got, on the one machine here, it took 1.39 seconds. On Peter Hessler's machine that has a faster CPU but a slower graphics card, it took 1.31 seconds.
Okay.
And then I think Benjamin Peralt tried on his i5 NUC with a faster CPU and a faster graphics card, and it was 1.29 seconds. And then a Lenovo Y40, which is, again, a faster CPU but a slower graphics card, was 1.46 seconds. So it definitely seems like the graphics card makes the big difference there.
Definitely. That's some interesting benchmarks, really definitive.
Yes.
But hey, if it gets the job done. Well, cool. Okay, well, next up, we have some information here about a FreeBSD journal. It looks like the July-August issue has now landed.
Yes,
so, of course,
it's all about using FreeBSD in the enterprise.
Okay.
Yeah, it was interesting when George Neville Neal tweeted about it. He was like, FreeBSD in the enterprise. And he's like, sorry, not the Starship.
Yeah, no Star Trek reference there, unless, maybe it was free just for you, Alan.
Yeah.
But it looks like we had some featured articles in this issue, which first up is Groupon's deal on FreeBSD, how to drive adoption of FreeBSD organization, and lessons learned in retraining Linux sysadmins.
Yeah, so it really breaks down what it took to get people over the fear of the change, and how even just to teach them to trust FreeBSD, right? Whenever you're starting to use something new, even if you're excited about it, you're always a little worried that something's going to break and you're not going to know how to fix it or something. But how they dealt with all those problems. And then Isilon, Benno Rice, who's going to be interviewing with us soon, hopefully, did a write-up about the experience Isilon had and some of the, mistakes that you shouldn't repeat when basing a product on FreeBSD. And, they talked even a bit of BSDCan about their major uplift operation to get from, FreeBSD 6 to catch up to what is now 11. And
basically, the bottom line is track head.
Yes.
Is what it boils down.
If you're going to build a product today, starting on FreeBSD 9.2 would be a bad idea because it's already end of life, right? You gotta,
That's right.
If you're building a product now, if you're starting to build a product now, you have to track head because otherwise, by the time your product is actually ready to release, you're already going to be an overly old version of BSD.
That's right. So it looks like next we have a reflections on FreeBSD.org packages, a status update on where we are with binary packages, what issues have been overcome, and of course what still remains to be fixed.
Yes, Brian Drury did a great write-up there. And then Deb did one about Inside the Foundation, which is kind of an overview of some of the things you might not be aware that the FreeBSD Foundation is doing, especially has some detail about their project with like high schools and even grade schools to try to get FreeBSD taught to people sooner. So maybe that they'll encounter it before they end up encountering something else, and get that interest out there. And there's also a great book review of the practice of system and network administration. So again, this isn't just for programmers. Whether it's you're trying to run something for an enterprise or just trying to be a sysadmin, the journal has something for everybody.
Nice. And as usual, we got other reports included. A list of some of these would be the ports report, SVN update, a conference report from the Essen Hackathon, and of course the event calendar, what's coming up. So go download that today if you haven't already gotten your copy.
Yeah.
Okay, next up we have building ARM v6 packages on FreeBSD the easy way.
Yes.
So this is something we've actually talked to Sean Bruno about this in the past. We did an interview talking about how you could build ARM v6 packages on FreeBSD, but not necessarily the way you'd think on the actual ARM v6 platform. So thankfully over time though, they've simplified the process and it no longer requires a ton of manual configuration or fussing around with image activators, etc.
Yeah, I remember originally there's over on this wiki, there's this huge gob of instructions with a bunch of magic incantations, and then hopefully you'll be able to build them.
Yeah.
And now
sacrifice a goat at midnight and do this and that, and then it might work.
And now it's literally install these two packages and turn it on and start the daemon and check out the ports tree and then run, Poudre bulk and you're done.
Yep. So the cool thing about this, for those who haven't seen that interview, is it allows you to build ARM v6 packages on your AMD 64 box, for example, which probably has a heck of a lot more RAM, more CPUs, more cores, etc.
Even just faster disks usually. If you're building for your Raspberry Pi, building on an SD card is slow.
Horrible. Or over a USB drive. Nope, no thank you. So this just makes it a heck of a lot easier. So because it's doing some QEMU magic in the background for the actual linking and whatnot, the actual portion of time it has to spend in emulation is smaller. But at this point, it's now real simple to do. You build just like you would build packages for any other x86. It just takes a bit longer during the build of them, of course, because it's doing some of the emulation there.
But actually, it's interesting because a lot of the ARM stuff still uses the older GCC. It tends to actually build faster.
Oh, really?
So when you do a make universe in FreeBSD, which builds every different architecture to make sure you haven't broken something, all the GCC ones like Spark 64 build twice as fast as AMD 64.
Oh, interesting. Okay, well, there you go. So it might even be quicker. Okay, next up, PCBSD news. So we published a new release schedule this last week. So we kind of sat back after this last release of 10.2 and reevaluated. We've been doing these quarterly updates, and now that we have current builds we do monthly, it was time to reevaluate how we do our releases in general. So the announcements we made is that we're going to be more closely following the FreeBSD schedules now, with major releases of PCBSD only occurring when FreeBSD does the next point upgrade or major version bump. So in other words, the next one from 10.2, the next one will be 11.0, 11.1, 11.2, 12.0, etc.,
Well,
etc.
technically, we should have a 10.3 in January or so before
Okay.
11.0. But
Well, in that case, we'll do a 10.3. So we typically will skip the .3 if they go straight to the next .0,
right,
because at that point people want, hey, there's new Xorg
Yeah.
drivers, or there's new this and that,
Lots
which
of
isn't
things.
necessarily
Yep.
going to be backported. But yeah, we will basically be tracking FreeBSD a lot closer. But in addition to this change, we've split our source tree. In the past, our edge package branch has also been kind of our really bleeding edge master branch from Git of all of our sources. So every PCBSD tool, when changes got made there, it might be in edge packages the next week. So we've split that up so we have a stable branch, again, to kind of follow FreeBSD here. So PCBSD edge packages built on 10.2, for example, you're getting the most current ports tree as of a couple days ago. But then the PCBSD tools there are the stable branch, so you're not getting bleeding edge changes. That's pretty stable and will only have bug fixes that have been backported. If you want the actual bleeding edge master stuff from PCBSD, those will be built now going forward on our monthly current images. So when this month's 11.0 September image came out for current, that'll have all the PCBSD latest bits in it, and then going forward, October, November, December, etc. With those with things that we deem bug fixes that are stable, those will be backported back to 10.2 as we go forward. So keep an eye out for that, and we're looking forward to doing this. This will slow it down, but at the same time speed things up, so you get packages hopefully sooner than you would have otherwise.
Yeah. So, a more stable desktop experience, but still with access to all the cool stuff if you want it.
Yeah, well, you want the latest Firefox, or it seems like there's a new CVE in Chromium or whatever, like every other day, right? And it used to be we'd make you wait every quarter till you got new packages on production, but now we can push those out monthly, is what we're thinking, because we know the PCBSD tools haven't changed much. It's just you're getting new upstream packages and things like Firefox and Thunderbird, etc., things that you care about your security vulnerabilities in, or if you're hosting servers, Apache, Nginx, and all the other bits, all those are kept to date a little better. So look forward to doing this, and I think this is going to work out better for us in the long run. Okay, time for feedback and questions this week. But before we do that, of course, we're going to mention TarSnap right now. You guys have heard us talking about this for a long time, and I assume you're all on it by now. But for those of you who aren't, first of all, shame on you. It's time to get on TarSnap because it's just awesome.
You will regret it if you don't.
That's right. Yeah. Remember, two types of people in the world: those who have lost data and those who are going to lose data. So you might as well get on TarSnap now and save yourself some pain later when that data loss finally does occur. But TarSnap makes it easy. tarsnap.com/BSD Now. Of course, you can go get signed up, download a client for just about everything under the sun, put a few bucks in your account, and watch how long that lasts you, because it is dirt cheap, which is fantastic. And of course, if you're paranoid like many of us are, you don't have to trust binaries downloaded from some site. I mean, come on, we're talking your data here.
You don't have to trust the company behind the site. Even though Colin is actually a pretty trustworthy guy, he designed the whole system specifically on the fact that you shouldn't trust him because you don't know him very well. Right. The entire idea is that you can look at the code and see data is encrypted with your key that only you have, then sent to the system, and no one can view those backups. And there's nothing any government can do to make Colin. He would give them your data if they ask. They just won't be able to do anything with it because
even if they break all his fingers, he still can't give it up.
Yeah. Well, he can give them the data, but he can't give them the key because he never had it.
That's right. That's right. So again, trust your data to TarSnap, because that's just the way backups should be done for sure. Okay, first up this week we have Joris writes in. And let's see here. It says BSD versus MacBooks. He said, "Hey guys, loving the show as always." So he said, quote from me. He said, or from Chris, I guess being me. He said, "So I think this should probably be discussed in the forum since Apple hardware isn't exactly our target system." Hey, I remember writing that. So he said, "Why isn't BSD, mostly free and OpenBSD, more actively pursuing compatibility with Apple and other modern machines?" He said, "I get the feeling that supporting stuff like MacBook Pros and other Ultrabooks isn't even on the wish list for Open and FreeBSD. I know the GNU Linux community is bigger and has more devs, and I know that BSD's put a lot of time in supporting legacy hardware. He said, but I've had this MacBook Pro for 3 years, and I still can't get anything more than a black rectangle with PCBSD or a 720p VISA screen on OpenBSD. I really want to think of BSD as state-of-the-art OS, but I don't want to compromise on the hardware. Thanks, Joris. Well,
I know at BSD
Yeah.
Cam there was a bunch of work to be able to boot Macs in FreeBSD with like the super high resolution console, like the
That's
4K Macs or whatever even. So there's some work for that.
Yeah. It's a smaller subset, right? So
Yeah.
for PCBSD, for example, I focus on BSD hardware, and we use NVIDIA drivers a lot. And these MacBooks, while they're interesting and maybe the hardware is cool, a lot of times there's just too many things that are deal breakers on it. For example, Wi-Fi drivers
Yep.
are total pain because they're usually Broadcom, and we got nothing for that. So on PCBSD anyway, I don't spend a lot of time worrying about them at the moment because there's only so much we can do, and then you still end up with no Wi-Fi driver.
Yeah.
So
While lots of BSD developers have MacBooks, it's mostly to run Mac on them.
that's right. So
But
unfortunately,
I think Ed and Marcel working on the UEFI stuff have done quite a bit to make that better. So you might try one of the snapshots of FreeBSD current and see if you have any more luck with that.
yeah, I was going to say I have put some effort into doing that. So I have a Mac Mini upstairs, for example, that's loaded with PCBSD and running that, and it works. And I did put some effort into getting Grub work and make the installer work, so you can install either in kind of a BIOS mode or you can do native UEFI on these. So you can try that, but again, it's just not something where if you send us in a bug report, we're going to go whip out another MacBook Air and try and make this all work, because there's just a lot of little things. Maybe if the community grows and more people want to run BSD on MacBooks,
Well, it might help.
gain support.
I know this coming week at VBSDCon, CDW is donating at least one MacBook Air to be won as part of the contest. I don't know. You remember the contest 2 years ago?
Yeah.
It was like, guess how many chips are in this jar or whatever. And then mostly it's like Adrian Chav's like picking through the chips, seeing if there's any good ones in it. It was funny. Being the BSD people, they were more interested in what chips were in the jar rather than how many chips were in the jar to win the free Mac. But
That's right. So actually, as an aside here, somebody on IRC just asked if we could suggest a good compatible USB wireless card for PCBSD. Do you have any one off the top of your head? I know the
No.
Intels usually work pretty well.
I don't know. Intel doesn't make any USB ones. I think almost all the USB ones are Raylink or Realtek. I don't actually know.
I don't think I have.
I think
it
there's a
within
wiki
arm's
with a
reach.
list, but I have no idea.
Yeah, I don't have it within my arm's reach here, but I have some little USB raw links that work really well. So I think Jim Brown gave me those from
Yeah.
BSD.
The biggest thing is that you can half the time can't even trust a model number because they will just change the chip and call it the same model still, and
Sure.
then
Amazon's your friend there,
Yep.
and the wiki as well, and hopefully you could figure it. I remember I went to Fry's computers once and just looked on the back of the box. It's like, oh, it's this chipset that works. I have a driver, and on my phone I'm just googling like, do we have a chipset driver for that? So that's one way to do it.
Yep.
Okay, well, next up we have Anonymous. He writes in saying, first of all, in episode 104, Theo wrote in to ask about a design for PCBSD laptop. You mentioned a Lenovo and production runs and random changes to the hardware, etc. As that BSD Now is a member of the Jupiter Broadcasting family and a brother cousin of the Linux Action Show and so on, has anyone considered talks between PCBSD, IX Systems, and System 76? Chris over at Linux Action Show is always raving about Bonobo and various other machines. He said the laptops are all firmware switches, not OS switches for the brightness and other special buttons. I think I remember hearing. Maybe Alan could take an SSD and try PCBSD on Chris's system next time they're around, or maybe Alan could get someone to get an evaluation loaner from System 76. Oh, interesting idea. Have you thought of that, Alan? Or I haven't.
No, my Lenovo works fine, so I've never had to fuss with it. We have great hopes for that Librem laptop as well, but you'll have to see when it ships. But
yeah, that's right.
There are more and more of a market now for those, laptops designed to run Linux, and if they happen to have the right set of components, then they'll run BSD nicely as well.
Okay, well, maybe it's time. Maybe I should see about getting one of those. Grab a System 76 box and wait for the Libra one as well, and we'll see if we can just make that go. Throw PCBSD on it and fix her up. But I'll have to take a look at that. Maybe that'll be something I get after I get back from FreeBSD Con. That would definitely be cool to set up.
And last in, Darian writes in. He says, in case you haven't seen this on TextNav or elsewhere, heads up about a cool ZFS application that's available now in the Google Play Store. It's called ZFS Mon, and it basically gives you a cell phone status screen of your various ZFS servers or your pools. Yeah,
you can view your pool, nice pie graphs and everything. It looks really pretty.
And it shows parses the output of like zpool status, and you can see here's my pool backup, RAID Z1, and then the devices, or there's tank, and you can see it's degraded because in the second RAID Z1 there's a failed device. And then you can see, it even has a progress bar for the scrub telling you how that's going and, how full the disk is and so on. That's really cool.
Yeah, that is pretty slick. Well, again, if you guys do a lot of ZFS, that's a great little app you can throw on your Android phone. That's pretty slick.
I see quite a few people using it. Lots of people using ZFS.
Yeah, who would have thought? There's a lot of ZFS users out there. That's cool. Okay, well, as we close here, one thing we do want to mention before we wrap it up is we got an email from somebody talking about a new BSD con down in Brazil that's in the process of being organized.
Yeah, well, we've mentioned the conference before, but yes, they're looking for sponsors as well. They wanted to shout out that if you happen to know anybody who'd be interested in sponsoring BSDCon in Brazil, you should check it out. And also, if you're interested in going to the conference, you should definitely check that out as well.
Sure. It looks like their Twitter tag is BSDCon_BR. So if you want to take a look at that, get in touch with those guys. So as we wrap up the show, of course, we want to remind you guys, feedback at bsdnow.tv. That's the place to send everything. That's what we monitor. That's where we will respond to you. And often that's where we get our feedback to put on the show as well. So send any questions, comments, show ideas, or topics, or stories that you find, anything you think we may have missed. Send it over to feedback at bsdnow.tv so we can get it in the rotation for an upcoming week.
Yep.
So awesome. So I hope you guys enjoyed this show, and we'll look forward to speaking to you same time next week. We'll be back from FreeBSD Con, so hopefully we'll have some good stories there, and I imagine we'll get an interview or two over there as well.
I hope so.
Looking forward to a good conference. And again, if you're seeing this and you live in the DC metro area or you can get there, come on out. You still have time. It should be Saturday and Sunday there.
Yep.
So we look forward to talking to you.
There's a couple of tickets left, so make sure you get one.
Cool. Okay. Well, we will see you then. Otherwise, we will talk to you same time next week.